Maya looked at the $5 in her hand and knew it was her last hope. It was a cold Tuesday in Chicago, and the wind felt like knives against her thin coat. She stood in front of the campus bookstore with a choice that made her heart ache. She could either pay the late fee for her final medical exam or eat a real meal for the first time in 3 days. Her stomach growled so loudly it felt like a physical blow. Around her, students in expensive designer boots rushed past laughing about their weekend plans. They didn't see the girl with the frayed backpack and the tired eyes. Maya had worked 3 jobs and slept 4 hours a night just to get this far. But as the sun began to set behind the skyscrapers, she realized that being a hero in the operating room meant nothing if she couldn't even survive the walk home. She tucked the crumpled $5 bill deep into her pocket and began to walk toward the bus stop, not knowing that a single encounter at the corner of 5th and Main was about to change the trajectory of her life forever. Maya walked toward the bus stop with her shoulders hunched against the freezing wind. The neon signs of the city blurred as her eyes filled with tears she refused to let fall. She passed a trash can where a tattered cardboard sign leaned against a brick wall. It read, "Please help," but the man sitting behind it was not shouting or begging. He was a shadow in the darkness. Mr. Sterling sat on a milk crate with his hands tucked into the sleeves of a coat that had seen better decades. He looked up as Maya approached, and their eyes met for a fleeting second. Maya stopped walking. She looked at the steam rising from a nearby subway vent and then back at the old man. She felt the weight of the $5 bill in her pocket. It was her bus fare and her dinner. It was the only thing keeping her from a completely empty stomach. But the man looked like he was fading into the concrete. His skin was the color of ash, and his lips were tinged with blue. Maya looked around and saw hundreds of people walking past him like he was invisible. A businessman in a $1,000 suit stepped right over the man's outstretched legs without even looking down. It felt like the whole city was cold, not just the weather. Maya took a deep breath and stepped closer to the milk crate. She felt a strange pull, as if this moment was more than just a random encounter. She saw a small medical book peeking out from the side of her bag, and the old man's eyes tracked the movement. He didn't ask for money. He asked if the book was difficult to read. His voice was deep and steady despite the shivering of his frame. Maya felt a lump in her throat as she realized he wasn't looking for a handout, but for human connection. She reached into her pocket and gripped the bill. If she gave it away, she would have to walk 4 miles home in the snow. If she kept it, she would be just like the man in the expensive suit. The silence between them grew heavy with the weight of her decision. She looked at his shaking hands and then at the nearby deli window where a warm light was shining on the sidewalk. She knew what she had to do, but she didn't know that Mr. Sterling was watching her with a gaze that was far sharper than any beggar should have. He was counting the seconds and measuring the kindness in her heart while the rest of the world looked away. The roar of an engine broke the heavy silence of the street as a cherry-red convertible pulled up to the curb, splashing icy slush all over Maya's worn boots. Chloe leaned out from the driver's seat with a smirk that was as cold as the winter air, while her friends in the back seat giggled at the sight of Maya standing next to a beggar. Chloe adjusted her designer sunglasses and looked at Maya with pure disgust, as if she were looking at a stain on an expensive rug. She asked Maya if she had finally found a roommate that matched her social standing, and then tossed a crumpled fast food wrapper toward the milk crates. The wind caught the trash, and it hit Mr. Sterling's shoulder before falling into the snow. Chloe laughed and told Maya that she was wasting her time because people like him were just parasites who didn't want to work for a living. She bragged about her father buying her the new car for getting an A on a paper that Maya had actually helped her research out of pity. Maya felt a surge of anger, but she kept her back straight and her head held high while Chloe continued her tirade. Chloe reached into her Gucci purse and pulled out a $20 bill, waving it in the air like a taunt before tucking it back inside and saying that she wouldn't give a cent to someone who smelled like a dumpster. She told Maya that her medical dreams were a joke because no prestigious hospital would ever hire a girl who spent her nights in the gutter with losers. The contrast was sharp and painful as the bright lights of the car illuminated Maya's frayed backpack and the old man's shaking hands against the backdrop of Chloe's mindless luxury. Mr. Sterling remained silent, but his eyes never left Chloe's face as if he were recording every cruel word she spoke into a permanent ledger. Chloe revved her engine and yelled that Maya should just quit school now and save everyone the embarrassment before, speeding off and leaving a cloud of exhaust in her wake. Maya looked down at her ruined shoes and then at the old man who was still looking at the spot where the car had been. The street returned to its quiet desolation, but the sting of the insults remained hanging in the air like a poisonous fog. Maya realized that the world saw her and the old man as the same thing, and for a moment she felt the crushing weight of her own poverties. She wondered if Chloe was right, and if all her hard work was just a long road to nowhere, while the rich simply inherited the earth. But then she felt the cold metal of the $5 bill in her hand, and knew that she still had one choice left to make. Maya watched the red taillights of Chloe's car disappear into the falling snow, and felt a coldness that had nothing to do with the winter air. Her hands were shaking as she looked at the crumpled $5 bill in her palm. It was the price of her dignity or the price of her survival. She looked at the old man sitting on the milk crate and saw him shivering so violently that his teeth rattled. He looked smaller now, as if the weight of Chloe's insults had physically crushed him. Maya knew that if she left him here without help, he might not make it until morning. She thought about her medical textbooks and the oath she hoped to take one day to protect life at all costs. She walked across the street to the small deli on the corner and felt the warmth of the heaters hit her face like a dream. She didn't buy a bus ticket. She didn't buy a sandwich for herself. She bought a large container of hot vegetable soup and a thick wool blanket that was on sale near the counter. When she walked back to the alley, she found Mr. Sterling with his head bowed against his knees. She gently draped the blanket over his thin shoulders and tucked the warm soup into his frozen hands. He looked up at her with eyes that seemed to hold a lifetime of secrets. He asked her why she was doing this after everything that girl had said to her. Maya knelt in the slush and told him that being poor was a condition, but being cruel was a choice. She told him that she would rather walk 4 miles in the snow than live with the knowledge that she let a human being freeze for the sake of $5. Mr. Sterling took a slow sip of the soup, and the color began to return to his face. He reached into his tattered pocket and pulled out an old fountain pen with a cracked barrel and a bent nib. He told her it was the only thing he had left from a life he once knew, and he wanted her to have it. Maya tried to refuse, but he insisted, saying that a healer should always have a way to write the truth. As she tucked the broken pen into her bag, she didn't realize that this small act of sacrifice had just set a massive, invisible machine into motion. Maya's kindness is about to face its ultimate test, and the truth behind that broken pen will shock everyone. If you believe a good heart is worth more than $1 billion, please like this video and subscribe to our channel. We are so curious to know where you are joining us from today. Are you watching from the sunny streets of Miami, the busy neighborhoods of London, or perhaps the beautiful landscapes of South Africa? Let us know in the comments below as we continue Maya's incredible journey. Maya stood up and brushed the wet slush from her knees, while the old man gripped the warm soup container like it was a holy relic. She watched him take another slow sip and felt a small flicker of peace despite the freezing wind howling through the alleyway. She looked at the broken fountain pen he had pressed into her hand and felt the weight of it in her palm. It was surprisingly heavy for something that looked like junk. She tucked it securely into the deepest pocket of her backpack and pulled her thin coat tighter around her chest. She told Mr. Sterling that she had to go because the 4-mile walk home would take her hours in this weather. He nodded slowly and told her to be careful because the streets at night did not always kind to those with a soft heart. Maya began her long journey back to her cramped apartment, with every step feeling like a battle against the elements. Her toes were numb within the first 20 minutes, and the snow began to fall in heavy white sheets that blurred the world around her. She passed the glowing windows of expensive restaurants where people were laughing and eating steaks that cost more than her monthly rent. Her stomach twisted with a sharp pang of hunger, but she kept her eyes fixed on the cracked pavement ahead. She thought about her medical exam and the $5 she had just given away. She knew she would likely be barred from the testing hall tomorrow morning for lack of payment. A part of her wondered if she had been a fool to choose a stranger's comfort over her own future. But then she remembered the way Mr. Sterling's hands had stopped shaking when she draped the blanket over him. She reached the outskirts of her neighborhood where the streetlights flickered and the buildings looked tired. As she turned the corner onto her street, she saw a familiar sight that made her heart drop into her stomach. Mrs. Gable, the landlord, was standing on the front porch with her arms crossed over her chest and a stack of Maya's belongings piled on the wet sidewalk. The yellow light of the porch showed the fury on the older woman's face. Maya ran forward and pleaded for just one more day, but Mrs. Gable pointed to the empty room through the open door and told her that a business was not a charity. She told Maya that her things would be in the trash by morning if she didn't move them now. Maya stood there in the snow with her medical books getting wet and no place left to go. She reached into her pocket and felt the cold metal of the broken pen. She felt like the world was closing in on her, and for the first time she began to wonder if the old man's gift was more than just a memento of a life lost. The wet cardboard boxes soaked through as Maya watched Mrs. Gable slam the front door and turn off the porch light, leaving her in total darkness. The rain had turned into a heavy sleet that glazed the sidewalk with a dangerous layer of ice. Maya looked at her life piled in a messy heap and felt a sob rise in her throat, but she swallowed it down. She spent the next hour dragging her belongings toward the small park 3 blocks away because she had nowhere else to turn. Every muscle in her body ached, and her fingers were so cold they felt like brittle glass. She found a sheltered spot under a concrete overhang near the public restrooms and began to arrange her books to keep them off the frozen ground. As she sat down on a damp bench, she saw a familiar figure sitting just 20 feet away. It was Mr. Sterling, wrapped tightly in the wool blanket she had bought him. He looked at her with a mixture of sadness and understanding that made Maya feel exposed. He asked her if the world had finally shown her its teeth. Maya looked at her medical ethics textbook and told him that she had lost everything because she chose to be a good person for one night. She explained that her landlord had no mercy and the university would have no patience for her empty pockets. Mr. Sterling did not offer empty words of comfort. Instead, he reached out and touched the backpack where the broken fountain pen was hidden. He told her that sometimes a person has to lose their roof to see the stars, and sometimes they have to lose their path to find their destiny. He told her a story about a man who built an empire of glass only to realize he was the only one shivering inside it. Maya listened to his rhythmic voice and found herself drifting into a light sleep despite the bitter cold. She woke up 3 hours later to the sound of a heavy car door closing nearby. A black sedan was idling at the curb with its headlights cutting through the gray morning mist. A man in a sharp gray suit stepped out and began walking straight toward their corner of the park. Maya felt a surge of panic, thinking it was the police coming to move them along. She grabbed her bag and stood in front of Mr. Sterling to protect him. The man stopped 5 feet away and ignored Maya completely. He looked at Mr. Sterling and gave a slight nod of his head. He asked if the 30 days were finally over. Maya looked back and forth between the two men with her heart racing. Mr. Sterling stood up with a grace that didn't belong to a beggar and shed the wool blanket like it was a royal robe. He looked at Maya and told her that he had a meeting he couldn't miss, but he promised her that the pen in her bag was mightier than any debt she owed. Before Maya could ask a single question, the man in the suit opened the rear door of the sedan for Mr. Sterling. The old man stepped inside, and the car sped away into the fog, leaving Maya alone with her soaked boxes and a secret she couldn't begin to understand. Maya stood frozen in the early morning mist as the taillights of the black sedan flickered and vanished around a distant corner. The park was eerily silent again, and the only proof that the last 10 minutes had actually happened was the lingering scent of expensive car exhaust and the empty milk crate. She looked down at her backpack, where the broken fountain pen was tucked away, and felt a shiver that had nothing to do with the freezing cold. She was a medical student who believed in logic and science, but nothing about Mr. Sterling's departure made any sense. She spent the next 2 hours moving her soaked boxes into a 24-hour storage locker, using the last few coins she found at the bottom of her bags. By the time she finished, her body was screaming in pain, and her vision was starting to blur from exhaustion. She had to get to the university for her final clinical rotation, but she looked like she had been dragged through swamp. She used the public restroom in the park to splash cold water on her face and tried to scrub the mud from her only decent pair of slacks. As she walked onto the campus grounds, she felt like an alien in a world of privilege. Every student she passed was carrying a hot latte and talking about their summer internships at prestigious hospitals. When she entered the main medical hall, she saw a large crowd gathered around the central bulletin board. Chloe was at the center of the group, wearing a white coat that looked like it cost more than Maya's entire tuition for the year. Chloe saw Maya and let out a loud mocking laugh that echoed through the marble hallway. She pointed at Maya's stained sleeves and told everyone that the scholarship board had made a mistake letting a street beggar into the program. Chloe claimed that she had seen Maya hiding in the park with a homeless man and hinted that Maya was probably stealing hospital supplies to sell on the black market. The other students began to whisper and move away from Maya as if her poverty was a contagious disease. Maya felt the sting of humiliation burning in her chest, but she didn't say a word. She reached for her bag to get her notebook, but her hand brushed against the broken fountain pen instead. Suddenly, a group of campus security guards marched toward the center of the hall, led by the dean of medicine himself. The dean looked pale, and he was holding a tablet with a trembling hand. He didn't look at Chloe or the other wealthy students. He walked straight toward Maya with a look of intense confusion and fear. He asked Maya if she was the one who had been seen with a man in a black sedan this morning. Before she could answer, a loud notification chime went off on every single phone in the hallway. It was an emergency broadcast from the university's board of trustees announcing that the entire medical wing had just been purchased by an anonymous donor. The dean looked at Maya and asked her to come to his office immediately because someone very powerful was waiting on the phone to speak with her. Maya looked at the broken pen and realized that the end debt of justice was finally about to be collected. The dean did not wait for Maya to gather her thoughts as he grabbed her elbow and hurried her toward the mahogany doors of the administrative wing. Chloe stood in the center of the hallway with her mouth hanging open and her face turning a deep shade of crimson as she watched the most powerful man on campus treat Maya like a visiting dignitary. Maya felt a wave of dizziness wash over her as the heavy doors swung shut behind them and the noise of the crowded hall faded into a muffled hum. The office was filled with the smell of old books and expensive leather, but Maya could only think about the mud drying on her ankles and the broken pen weighing down her backpack. The dean gestured to a high-backed chair and pushed a speakerphone button on his desk with a trembling finger. A voice filled the room that was both familiar and terrifyingly different from the one she had heard in the park. It was the voice of Mr. Sterling, but the gentle rasp of the beggar had been replaced by the cold steel of a man used to commanding thousands. He did not waste time with greetings or small talk. He told the dean that Maya was to be granted the Sterling Excellence Scholarship immediately and that her tuition was already paid in full through a wire transfer from his private account. Maya sat in stunned silence as she heard him describe her as the only person in the entire city who understood the true value of a life. But then the tone of the conversation shifted and the air in the room seemed to freeze. Mr. Sterling mentioned that he had been informed of certain allegations regarding Maya's character and a missing fountain pen. He asked the dean if it was true that a student named Chloe had called the police to report a theft. The dean began to stutter and sweat while Maya realized that the trap was closing, but she was not the one inside it. Mr. Sterling told them that the pen in Maya's bag was a limited edition masterpiece worth over $50,000, and he had gifted it to her as a test of her integrity. He then gave the dean a chilling ultimatum. He stated that any student who had used their wealth to bully or falsely accuse a peer had no place in a profession dedicated to healing. Maya heard the sound of a pen scratching on paper as the dean began to frantically fill out a disciplinary form. She realized that by following Mr. Sterling to the car, she had inadvertently validated every lie Chloe had told the authorities earlier that morning. Her heart hammered against her ribs as she looked at the silver fountain pen on the dean's desk and wondered if her reputation was truly being saved or if she was being used as a pawn in a billionaire's game of revenge. She wanted to speak up and tell the truth about the night before, but the weight of her poverty kept her silent. Little did she know that Chloe was currently standing outside the office door with a recording device in her hand, and a plan to turn this miracle into Maya's final downfall. Maya felt the walls of the office closing in as the dean began to finalize the paperwork that would seal Chloe's fate. But just as the silence became unbearable, a sharp knock echoed through the room, and the heavy doors flew open. Chloe marched in with her eyes wide and a frantic smile on her face while holding her phone like a weapon. She did not look at the dean or the terrified staff members. She looked straight at Maya and began to play a grainy audio recording that she had captured only minutes ago near the storage lockers. The voice on the recording was distorted, but the words were clear enough to freeze the blood in Maya's veins. It was a man's voice whispering about a long-term deception and a plan to infiltrate the Sterling medical empire from the inside. Chloe screamed that Maya was not a hero, but a plant working for a rival corporation to manipulate the old man's emotions. She claimed that Maya had staged the entire encounter in the park to gain access to the Sterling family secrets. The dean looked from the phone to Maya with a gaze that turned from fear to cold suspicion in a heartbeat. He snatched the silver fountain pen back from the desk and accused Maya of being a professional con artist who preyed on the elderly. Maya tried to speak, but her voice failed her as the crushing weight of her poverty was suddenly used as evidence of her guilt. She realized that in the eyes of these powerful people, a girl with nothing would always be the prime suspect. The scholarship offer was retracted as quickly as it had been given, and the dean ordered security to escort Maya off the campus immediately. He told her that her medical career was over before it had even begun, and that he would personally ensure she was blacklisted from every hospital in the country. Maya felt her heart shatter as she was led through the hallway where her classmates stood in a line to watch her disgrace. Chloe stood at the front of the crowd with a look of pure triumph, as if she had just won a war. Maya was pushed out of the glass doors and onto the cold pavement where the sleet was still falling. She stood there with her backpack and her ruined dreams while the security guards stood like statues at the entrance. She had no money and no home, and now she was a fugitive in the eyes of the only community she had ever wanted to join. She reached into her pocket and found a small piece of paper that must have been inside the pen case. It was a local address written in a sharp and elegant script. As she looked at the paper, she realized that the trap was far larger than she ever imagined, and the man she had saved might be the most dangerous person she had ever met. The rain turned into a freezing downpour as Maya stared at the small piece of paper in her trembling hand. The address led to a private terminal at the city airport and not a corporate office. She felt a surge of desperation as she realized she had no money for a taxi, and her only hope was the bus pass that was now buried somewhere in her soaked boxes. She began to run through the gray streets of Chicago with her lungs burning and her wet clothes clinging to her skin like ice. Every person she passed looked away from the girl who was crying and talking to herself in the rain. She arrived at the high security gate of the terminal 3 hours later and looked like a ghost from a nightmare. The guards moved to block her path, but Maya held up the silver fountain pen and the small scrap of paper. One of the men looked at the pen, and his eyes widened before he spoke into his radio in a hushed tone. The heavy steel gates began to slide open, and a black SUV sped toward her from the hangar. The door opened, and the same man in the sharp gray suit stepped out, but this time he looked worried. He told Maya that she was late, and that the board of directors was already voting on the future of the Sterling Medical Group. He pulled her into the vehicle and told her that Chloe's father was the one leading the coup against Mr. Sterling. He explained that Chloe had not found the recording by accident, but had been coached by her father to destroy anyone who showed Mr. Sterling genuine kindness. Maya realized that she was the only witness who could prove that Mr. Sterling was sane and in control of his faculties. They arrived at the entrance of a glass skyscraper in the heart of the financial district, just as a group of reporters began to swarm the lobby. Maya was pushed through a back elevator and taken to the top floor where the air was thick with the smell of expensive cigars and cold ambition. The elevator doors opened to reveal a massive boardroom where 20 men and women were sitting around a table that looked like a lake of dark wood. At the head of the table sat Chloe's father with a triumphant smile and a gavel in his hand. He looked at Maya and told the board that the girl who had stolen the chairman's mind had finally arrived to confess her crimes. But then the wall at the back of the room began to slide open to reveal a hidden medical suite. Mr. Sterling was lying in a high-tech bed surrounded by humming monitors and silent nurses. He looked frail, but his eyes were like two burning coals. He told the board that he had not been wandering the streets because he was lost, but because he was searching for the one thing money could never buy. He pointed a shaking finger at Maya and told them that she was the new majority shareholder of the entire hospital network. The room went dead silent as Chloe's father dropped the gavel and it shattered against the floor. Maya felt the broken pen in her hand begin to glow under the bright LED lights, and she realized that her life as a student was over, but her life as a savior had just begun. The boardroom felt like a tomb as every pair of eyes turned toward Maya, who was still dripping with rain and clutching her worn backpacks. Chloe's father began to shout about technicalities and legal loopholes, but Mr. Sterling raised a single trembling hand to silence the room. He spoke with a clarity that cut through the chaos like a surgeon's blade. He revealed that the 30 days he spent on the streets were not a sign of madness, but a carefully calculated trial to find an heir who could not be bought or corrupted. He told the board that his own children and partners had failed the test within the first 24 hours because they saw a man in rags as a liability instead of a human being. Maya felt the room spinning as the gravity of her new reality set in. She was no longer just a student struggling to find her next meal. She was now the protector of the very institutions that had tried to destroy her only hours ago. Mr. Sterling looked at the dean, who was currently trying to hide behind a stack of legal folders, and told him that his tenure at the university was officially over. He then turned his gaze toward Chloe, who had been brought into the room by security. The girl who had once mocked Maya's poverty was now shaking with a fear that no amount of designer clothing could hide. Mr. Sterling did not yell or lose his temper. He simply told her that she had failed the only exam that truly mattered in medicine, which was the exam of the heart. He announced that her father's shares were being liquidated to fund a massive trust for the homeless population of the city, and that Maya would be the sole administrator of those funds. Maya looked at the silver pen and realized it wasn't just a writing tool, but a key to a kingdom built on compassion. She saw Chloe's father break down in tears as he realized he had lost his empire because of his daughter's arrogance. But as the lawyers began to swarm the table, Maya felt a sudden pang of guilt. She realized that while she had gained everything, she had also become the very thing she used to fear, which was a person with the power to ruin lives with a single word. She looked at Mr. Sterling and saw a flicker of something dark in his eyes, as if he were waiting to see if the wealth would change her the same way it had changed everyone else in that room. The true test was not over, and the choices she was about to make would define whether she was a savior or just another billionaire in the making. The heavy silence in the boardroom was broken by the sound of Chloe sobbing as the security team stepped forward to escort her and her father toward the elevators. Maya stood in the center of the room and looked at the mountain of legal documents that now bore her name, but she did not feel like a queen. She felt like the same girl who had been standing in the rain only 24 hours ago. She turned to the dean of medicine, who was pale and shaking near the mahogany desk. Maya told him that he was right about one thing, which was that the hospital network needed to maintain the highest standards of integrity. She then informed him that his first task before leaving his post was to personally reinstate every student who had been unfairly dismissed for being unable to pay their tuition during the last semester. The dean nodded frantically and scrambled to grab his pen as if his life depended on it. Maya then turned back to Mr. Sterling, who was watching her with a faint and mysterious smile from his medical bed. She told him that she accepted the responsibility, but she refused to keep the $50,000 fountain pen for herself. She asked the legal team to auction the pen immediately and use every single cent to pay the overdue rent for every tenant in Mrs. Gable's apartment building. She wanted the woman who had thrown her out in the snow to know that her own mortgage was being paid by the very girl she had called trash. Mr. Sterling let out a short and dry laugh and told Maya that she had a sharp mind for justice. But as the board members began to file out of the room, Maya saw the man in the gray suit whisper something to a group of men in dark trench coats who were waiting in the shadows of the hallway. The man approached Maya and told her that the transition of power would not be as simple as a signature. He explained that Chloe's father had hidden assets and debts that were now her legal responsibility. If she could not find the missing ledgers within the next 48 hours, the entire hospital network would face federal audit that could shut everything down. Maya realized that the billionaire's gift was not just a reward, but a heavy crown that was already starting to crush. Sorry. She looked at the city lights through the floor to ceiling windows and wondered if she was being set up to fail by the very man she had saved. The weight of the world was on her shoulders, and the true enemy was no longer standing in front of her, but was hidden deep within the system she now owned. Maya looked out at the sprawling skyline of Chicago from the top floor of the Sterling building and felt a strange sense of calm wash over her for the first time in years. The missing ledgers were not hidden in a safe or a secret vault, but were found right where they started in the small medical textbook she had been carrying through the snow. Mr. Sterling had slipped a microchip into the spine of the book during their first night in the alleyway, knowing that the greed of his enemies would make them overlook something so simple and humble. With the evidence secured, Chloe's father was barred from the industry forever, and the federal audit was settled within 24 hours. Maya officially took her seat as the chairwoman of the board, but her first act was not to buy a mansion or a sports car. She returned to the park where she had slept in the freezing cold and commissioned the construction of a world-class medical center that would treat the homeless for free. She found Mrs. Gable standing in the rain outside the building that Maya now owned, and instead of seeking revenge, Maya handed her a job as a cleaning supervisor and told her that everyone deserves a second chance to learn kindness. Chloe was seen months later working as a lowly assistant in a rural clinic far from the city lights, learning the hard way that a white coat is earned through service and not inherited through blood. Mr. Sterling eventually recovered enough to walk again, and he spent his afternoons in the hospital garden watching Maya lead a new generation of doctors who valued a patient's soul as much as their symptoms. Maya kept the broken fountain pen on her desk as a constant reminder that the greatest riches are often found in the people the world chooses to ignore. The $5 sacrifice that almost cost Maya her future had instead saved the lives of thousands and proved that karma is not a myth but a promise kept by the universe. If you believe that true wealth is measured by the goodness in your heart, please like this video and subscribe to our channel for more stories of justice and hope. We want to hear from you today. If you were in Maya's shoes, would you have forgiven those who tried to destroy you, or would you have walked away with the money and never looked back? Share your thoughts on the power of second chances in the comments below.